Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. This is the High Caliber Man podcast. Recently, I spoke about Stoic philosophy, about it being a philosophy that is something that is practiced, not just reflected on, but it's something that you should implement. I spoke about Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, just touched a little bit on their histories. I've been watching the news and so many things have come to my attention with respect to economic issues, Trump and his embargo and his trade wars, the Middle East, and the genocide that continues to take place. And just this week, at the beginning of the week, Liverpool FC and their supporters celebrated in the middle of Merseyside, celebrated their victory with respect to winning the English Premiership. And there was an incident where a motor vehicle was in the crowd of supporters, and it seemed as if whether the driver lost control, became panicked, or had malicious intent to cause harm and damage. But there was an incident and people were injured. Now, the Merseyside police, within a few hours, made a statement that they had arrested somebody and they said he was a middle-aged white 53-year-old male. Quite unusual because they don't always release details about people's ethnicity or apart from maybe their gender and their age, right? They don't really usually, police in general in the UK don't, just release facts related to a ongoing investigation and who's been taken in for questioning in terms of their demographics, unless they're going to name the individual that's been arrested, right? And it's somebody famous or something like that. But it has transpired that the reason they did that is because they were aware of malevolent forces or bad actors that would have used that incident to spread misinformation, knowing that there are people on the far right, disgruntled, people with grievances, and just outright racist, just bad mind outright racist that would have used the incident to whip up a frenzy against minorities within the UK and to basically cause trouble. The rabble rousers would have jumped on it, right? And so it made me think about the way that identity groups can be reactionary, right? And play into sort of victim culture. Sometimes there are some groups, they don't have a particular sort of mandate as such, but they just wait for incidents to occur for them to be aggrieved by or to whip up a mass of support based on grievance, right? They don't have a specific agenda outside of that, right? I think some journalists like James O'Brien wrote to refer to them as sort of snake oil salesman type politics. But any group can be just reactionary. And one of the things I want to bring it back to Stoic philosophy is that it invites, right, people to be proactive. Be proactive in your life and don't blame any other person or circumstances around you for your hardships and failures. You know what I mean? Like, we are the products of our own decisions and our own responses. And I want to give an example of collective, I guess, proactive collective stoicism. Just as a simple example or a simple illustration, but just so that we can take some of these ideas and if you find them beneficial, you can take them on and start to practice them in your life, right? So let's go back to the 1950s, right? West Indian people came to this country. They were living in rented accommodation, new arrivals, some found it very difficult to find suitable accommodation, particularly men, because uh, there was a sign that would often be, and it wasn't illegal at the time, that would in the window that would say no dogs, no blacks, no Irish. Some people made a joke to say if he was a black Irish dog, he was finished, right? But you understand there was, Irish people were excluded, black people were excluded. And it's a very to put a dog in that list is like, wow, this just sounds not in this day and age, it sounds crazy. But that was England, right? It was what it was. So with finding it difficult to find suitable accommodation, there were those West Indian. I'm using that phrase particularly because that was a phrase that was used in those days, right? There was those West Indians that thought instead of petitioning, they didn't have that mindset to complain, to create placards and, create politics of grievance or be victims, but they just said, you know what, we clearly find ourselves unwelcome, so we need to consider as we're going to try to set some kind of roots in this country to work for a few years to earn money to save up to buy our mansions back home, right? Let's purchase it. People started to think about or make attempts to buy homes. They didn't have good credit with the banks. They faced discrimination with the banks, uh, and couldn't get loans initially. Again, not opting to create placards with slogans, with rally cries, with petitions to complain to the banks or complain to the government or to demonstrate and air the grievances, which they would have been well within their legal rights and democratic rights to do so, right? But they chose not to do that. What they did was they employed an old practice from the West Indies called partner, which is in standard English is called like a partnership, will be considered a economic partnership. And it's basically a system where a number of people of good character and trust, they invest their money on a weekly basis and periodically would receive large interest-free loans. It wasn't a pyramid scheme because you got out what you put in, but it allowed for people to receive large interest-free loans. And so this gave many leverage with the banks to then impress them, and people started to get loans, and people were able to um, pay off their houses, and house their families, and the rest is history, so to speak. But the point I make is that they could have taken another route of self-pity and blame, right? And pointing the fingers at the bank, which I said initially they would have been in their rights to do so, but there's something sometimes that is a bit paralyzing about taking that approach to things, right? And so it robs you of being proactive. When you become an expert in identifying all the injustices, all the ills, it can become habitual, but it can paralyze you into not acting. And as that is that's on a group level, but people can sometimes fall into that way of being as individuals, right? We can start to note all of the things that negative that have happened to us and that we've been a victim of circumstances and we've been victims of circumstance and injustice and unfair treatment, right? But it doesn't allow us to be proactive. It takes away our gusto to try and, you know, take control of our destiny, right? So that is one of the things that the Stoics invite us to do is to be proactive, right? And remember not to blame others for the circumstances that we find ourselves in, right? They might have been the person that knocked us down, but if we're sitting on the floor, then we're responsible for getting up. So it's not necessarily about blame, but we're talking about responsibility. The next invitation that the Stoics make is to respect the process, that things have a process, right? To get from point A to point B involves a process, not a protest, but a process, right? So, be a hustler in life, so to speak. This is me paraphrasing, right? You be like a hustler who knows how to work hard and to be consistent, right? You got to master your craft and meet the opportunities with preparedness, right? For success to take place, you have to face adversity. So self-determination is part of the journey or part of the requirement, right? We have to manage our self-defeating thoughts. Things will happen in life where you go for a goal, right? And you receive a knockback, right? And that is a natural part of the process. It's not, how can I put it? It's not as if you've been singled out and life is against you, right? And destiny is against you. This is just a natural resistance that life produces when you strive for things, right? I remember hearing Steve Harvey speak about his life story on a particular interview, and he explained that he had left home. He had been practicing and developing his craft of comedy, had a few stand-up gigs here and there, and run himself into debt, or like was out of money, was living in his car. He was going through a real tough time, but one of the things that he kept doing, when they say keep your head to the sky, is that he kept practicing his craft. He kept perfecting his craft and just kept trying his best to get his name out there, get his brand out there, whatever the case may be. He was so broke that he said when at one point he got a phone call and a guy invited him across the country for a gig, and he barely had the fare. But when he made it there, within a few days, he got another call, and it was as if not the law of synchronicity, but one thing led to another, and he was able to pick up momentum and then find himself as literally like one of the kings of the comedies, which is something where they went around the United, himself and Bernie Mac and um, Cedric the Entertainer and Hewley when they went on a national tour, and they literally made millions, right? But from a state of just living in your car without no money, he had to stick with the process and he had to manage his self-defeating thoughts. So respecting the process is key. Yeah, and holding on and being determined is all part of it. That's what the Stoics invite us to do, is to respect the process, right? Things take time. To bake a cake is a certain amount of ingredients. You need the right temperature, and it needs to be in the oven for a particular period of time. Yeah, to bear that in mind, right? Focus on what is in your control, right? What is in our control, what is in our capacity, right? Is what where our focus needs to be, right? And how we adapt, right? That's what's in our control. But external circumstances are not in our control, right? I used to work on, what do they call it? I worked in safeguarding, as I've mentioned in many interviews, many times. And the area that I worked in was, or the particular role, the guys in the prison used to call it suicide watch, right? So I worked with a lot of young men that were in despair or feeling depressed. That weren't the only clientele that I spoke with, right? I run an anger management clinic. I just spoke with guys who just was feeling stressed out or having a bad day or just wanting somebody to talk to at times. It wasn't always about life and death and this person trying to end their life, but that was the nature of the main nature of the job. It was to manage people that were, considering ending their life or considered at risk, right? Um, but I remember speaking with one young man that had been convicted for, what was he sentenced to? Something like 10 years, 9 or 10 years, young guy, 19 years old, right? He'd been a bit naughty. He was caught with a cache of weapons, let's say, and contraband, narcotics, right? Um, he didn't complain. He held it. He didn't play the old routine of it wasn't me. He's convicted, not to hide. We're just talking. He's talking about his life, what's going on for himself, how he found himself where he was. And he was very mature about the prospect of spending a number of years at Her Majesty's, one of Her Majesty's hotels, Um, and I remember sharing with him saying, you know that you don't have control over the circumstances that will allow you to go home, that the date is set, or the possibility of when your earliest release won't be for a number of years. You're going to be here in this place or a place like this, and you don't have any choice over that. So that's like the external circumstances. But I said, but what you do have control over is your attitude. right? And the choices that you make. You don't have the choice to just walk out the gate and go home, but are you going to be involved in the gossip and the gang activity and the negativity on the land? And is that going to be your focus? Borrowing and selling and wheeling and dealing and the various negative things that is part of the prison culture, right? Or are you going to make more of your focus about getting on the right educational program and seeing if you can get a degree or if you can get a qualification in a trade, like making the time work for you. You're not you serving time, but making the time serve you. But that's where your choice is. But your choice to go isn't possible. And it was a good conversation, and I just use that as a way of saying even if we're not in physical prison, right? But there are limitations to what's going on externally, right? That we have control over. But what we do have control over is our attitude, the choices that we make. And it's the important thing is to identify the difference between the two. The things that we can't change that are out of our control is not worth pouring energy into those things, lamenting and feeling sorry about them, but it's more, let's say, productive, right? To focus your energy on those things that you can change. A bit like the people from the Windrush who saw the sign saying no dogs, no no blacks, no dogs, no Irish, or whichever order it came in, that obscene and foul notice that would be in the window. They had a number of choices to make and certain things were just out of their control. And so they focused on what was in their control, got the results that they were after, which is housing basically, right? And I think the last thing that I'll speak about today is the idea of friendship. Choose your friends, your associates wisely. Whether they say that you don't have to be the one playing in the mud to get dirty, right? Old time people used to say, you go to bed with dogs, you rise with fleas, right? So be careful of the company you keep, right? We are the average of the five people that we spend the most time with. And that means, put simply, if our friends or our associates are energy drainers, right? People that are always seeing the glass as half empty as opposed to half full, as people who will always find a problem, even if you are going for a goal, they'll articulate a catalog of reasons of why you won't be able to accomplish that, why it's a bad idea, as opposed to if you want to accomplish that, what you'll need to do. But the people that will drain and sap your energy, if you, if those are the people that you're around continuously, the likelihood of you staying in their company and elevating is slim to zero, right? If you spend your time with people who are in a field that you want to master or you have something in common with and you discuss these ideas and these naturally occur, right? I'm talking about in the natural occurrence of friendships, things rub off, things fall off onto us. So you have to be mindful of who you spend your time with because it's friendships and associations is a physical and a metaphysical thing. It's a spiritual thing, right? Things, their relationships are symbiotic. We might influence them, but they influence us as well. So you have to be mindful about the people that you keep in your circle or that you spend time with. Time is the most precious commodity, and it's the one thing that we can't get back. You could lose money, you could spend money, you could make money, right? You could, it's like snakes and ladders. You lose a certain sum of money, you do a deal, you do some business, you come into good fortune, you work in your angle, you make a large sum of money, for example. Possible. But once time has passed on this journey that we call life, once that time has passed, there's no way of rewinding that clock. You know what I'm saying? Even if you watch the Butterfly Effect, it was just a movie, right? Um, so watch the company you keep, right? Active endurance is something that we need to practice. Yeah. Acknowledge your current position, right? Active. When I spoke about proactive, right? Seek solutions to your current problems and endure the hardships, yeah? But you have to be able to manage self-defeating thoughts, those negative slogans or the negative mantras that might come in your head. You have to know how to hear them, recognize them for what they are. Some of us suffer from imposter syndrome or negative ideas, when we feel we're undeserving of these things, right? We have to push past that to hear it, recognize it, but keep it moving. Keep the actions consistent. Keep the actions consistent. Consistency is key, you know? So those are just a few invitations. We ain't gone hardcore, we ain't gone deep into the stoicism, but we're just touching you with a piece. If there's anything that you found valuable in this, don't be found wanting. Internalize it and start to practice it, right? Start to practice it, start to act on it, right? Uh, and remember the people who were successful, even though they found themselves in a negative situation. We can all be victims of circumstance, or we can be victors. We have to just make a choice, right? Life is about choices. So, just want to give you a little bit of food for thought. If you want to leave a comment, do so. Like, share, subscribe. You know the drill, you know the routine. But I appreciate you watching this, staying for the duration. So till next time, peace.